While we're waiting to start, I'll just explain this, what I consider a very pretty chart. So this is the revised Tree of Life that's been published fairly recently. And so they did this by looking at a number of spots for areas. And so most of these are bacteria. So bacteria are genetically related and are the bullies. They're the ones that are the world is owned by bacteria. Our bodies could be seen as condos for small microbes. So down here, there's something called archaea, and then the eukaryotes. So the eukaryotes are what we think of as cellular organisms that have a nucleus, right? So kind of like that's us. And so humans are way down in the corner, right? So if we're thinking about, it used to be the Tree of Life, humans were at the top, and then there was all this, stuff under it, right, that led up to humans. Here we see us as an outlier from an outlier on that. So I thought it was interesting and a pretty chart, so I thought I'd put it on the cover slide. I showed this to a mathematical physicist from Caltech, and I explained it to him where the eukaryotes are, and he immediately turned it to put the eukaryotes up top. Okay, good morning. Glad to see everybody. And this is the third and final presentation on my series on the case for the Creator. I was talking to Christy and thanking her for posting the first one, which is available on YouTube. And she said that they plan to post this one and the last one as well. So you'll have some access to it. So that's very kind. Excuse me? Yeah, I gave her the first ones, but I can give her the second one and the third one too. Okay, because it's kind of dense, so I think it's helpful to have the slides to refer to. And again, on this talk, I think they'll be helpful again, because I plan to try to adduce evidence that there's fine-tuning in biology and chemistry, as we saw there was in physics. But I plan to go over that fairly high level and quickly so that we have more time to discuss stuff later. But having the slides, I think, will be useful to, if you want to go back and see what I was trying to convey there. So let's start with the argument summary thus far. You remember that the first time we made the case that the universe has a purposive creator who transcends time, space, and matter. We showed that the science shows that space, time, and matter all started with the Big Bang. It leads to the conclusion that something must have started it that transcends space, time, and matter. And that it appears to be a purposive creator because creation is so complicated. The idea that it was just an accident doesn't seem to be very realistic. Last week, we talked about there is a sustained tendency to build up complexity over time and across cosmic domains, although the universe as a whole is winding down in energy after the Big Bang. And we see the creation of stars, planets, plants, animals, humans, societies, where we have an increasing energy rate density that has a statistical central tendency, which I noted was very unusual because when statisticians see central tendencies, they all, resonate on that frequency. It's unusual. And to see it over eons and across so many domains is very unusual. So that if on this line of argument, we complex humans could be seen as an important capstone of creation, in an otherwise vast, cold, pitiless, and indifferent cosmos. Okay. However, humans are held at arm's length from the Creator. What do I mean by this? I've made the case that creation is continuing and that it develops over time and across space. And I'm saying that it raises the question that if the Creator wanted to create humans, why not just create them in a static environment, if you will, rather than going through all this difficulty to have them kind of develop over time, right? So I tried to make the case for the Creator. I've made the case that humans are important, and then I'm asking the question, if humans are the purpose of creation, then why don't we have a more direct relationship with the Creator? That's where I'm going. Okay, so last week we discussed why humans could be seen as very special. And this week I plan to start by reinforcing the contention, even though there's a statistical inference one can make from those numbers that I presented last time. I'm now going to try to look and see if there's any additional evidence of fine-tuning that would indicate that there was something there influencing and encouraging this central tendency from the beginning, right? I'm going to look for evidence of fine-tuning in, as I mentioned, the chemical and biological sphere. And as I mentioned, I'm going to do that at kind of a high level and try to keep going. But, you know, if you want to talk about it, we sure can. Absolutely. Okay. So what I've been presenting is different from what I would call the name brand scientist point of view that we can see. And so, for instance, scientist Stephen Hawking, outstanding name brand, once described human life along the lines that it is chemical continuation on the third rock from a very minor star in an unremarkable galaxy, not very important. Okay. On the other hand, Christians used to believe that the Earth was the center of the universe and that everything revolved around it. The sun revolved around it, certainly. Okay, so I'm now going on to, is there defensible evidence that the Earth is somehow special and that humans are significant? Okay, so there are requirements for life to bud forth on a planet. So there's about 6 of them, at least. So a planet has to have essential elements and molecules, sources of energy, a narrow temperature range near its surface, and dynamic stability over billions of years. I'm going to try to explain what that means in a minute, but we can think of the biosphere on Earth that has tides and winds and volcanic activity. It's active, as opposed to, let's say, Mars, which is dead, right? Okay. So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about dynamic stability, but over billions of years. And of course, when stars are new, they're less bright than after they've been around for a while. And then planets have this tendency to move. Yeah. So maintaining dynamic stability for planets is not so easy, right? And especially over billions of years, because the star's got to be burning at a reasonable temperature all that time. Okay. So another requirement for the planet is its mass has to be able to support a biosphere without becoming too large, so that it has to have enough gravitational pull to keep the atmosphere around it, right? But not too much. And then protection from hazardous materials in space to include meteoric impacts and radiation, so that we can think that if we get hit by an asteroid, you know, ask the dinosaurs how that went. You know, that was a problem. Yeah, it's hard to ask them now. And then also ionizing regulation for everybody with their SP45 in the summer. You know what I'm talking about. Okay. And then its parent star is single. It has a mass and a narrow range, and that it's in a galactic habitable zone. Basically, the idea is you want, because water is the solvent of life, you want that planet to have a stable temperature range that allows liquid water, right? You don't want it to be steam and you don't want it to be ice, although those can happen, but you want it basically in this narrow temperature range, 0 to 100 Celsius. You want to be able to have water available to act as a solvent for the chemical reactions that support life. So another factor is it needs to be not too near the center of a galaxy because of all the radiation and the dynamic changes that take place that can kill off life, but also not too far away either from at the end, because then there's not enough elements to support the creation of rocky planets. Okay, what do I mean rocky planets? Rocky planets would be like Earth, Mars, Venus, Mercury, as opposed to the gas giants, right? Neptune, Uranus, those. Okay. So those are the requirements, right? So last time I mentioned the, I think it was the Pauli paradox, but anyway, if the conditions for life abound, then why aren't we seeing evidence of other advanced civilizations? Okay. So I think this list gives a suggestion that even though we find a number of so-called exoplanets, it doesn't mean that, life could just spring up on any of them. Okay. So I'm going on to try to make the case that Earth is a special place, so that people who just dismiss it and say, so what? I'm trying to indicate that because it meets all these requirements, Earth is a very special place indeed. Okay. And that it was intrinsic to the fact that humans have developed here. Okay. So that we've got a very large liquid iron core, which, provides a so-called magnetosphere, okay, which protects the Earth from harmful radiation, to include from the sun and solar wind. So that, for instance, as I mentioned, Mars doesn't have that. And so there's the received wisdom is that the solar wind, which is small particles, electrons, photons, etc., blew away the Martian atmosphere. So that by having this magnetosphere, because the particles from the sun are charged, you can protect the Earth against those. We have a thin crust that enables the movement of tectonic plates, which circulates elements. We have an abnormally large moon, which stabilizes the Earth's optimal rotation. Okay? So that if you're trying to develop life and your axis wobbles, it's a problem, okay, in developing life. But because we have this unusually large moon that stabilizes us, I think we've got a tilt angle of like 23 degrees, which gives us seasons, which then encourages development of, I would say, I'll call it more sophisticated elements that can survive at cold temperatures and hot temperatures, right? Because we've got seasons. Okay. Bacteria don't do that. They have bacteria that are all over the world, but they have some that are very good at hot temperatures and some that are good at cold temperatures. Having the business model of the microbe, that it can survive in both hot and cold temperatures, requires, I would say, added levels of complexity. And by having seasons on your planet, it helps that to be engendered, right? The planet. Okay, as I mentioned, the surface temperature, liquid water remains on its surface for some 4 billion years. That's pretty good. And remains chemically stable, but far from thermodynamic equilibrium as I've tried to suggest, which is with the biosphere, and this stable but dynamic environment is very rare, and it supports development of more complex beings. So my conclusion is that Earth is a very special place, Stephen Hawking notwithstanding. Moving right along. So Earth also has plentiful elements, so that the most plentiful are the ones that are needed for life. So that in here we have the yellow and blue. They're just the ones I talked last week about, the building blocks of life, and I compared them to Lego bricks. And so here we see the ones that have in effect, the extra electron, then bind with the ones who are missing electrons to fill their outer shells. The outer shells are happier or more stable or lower energy if they have 8 electrons in their outer shells in the middle range of the elements, right? So that's another factor that I've mentioned that goes toward building complexity, right? So anyway, point of this chart is that the elements that support life are the ones here that are circled, that are very plentiful and not trace elements. There are also trace elements, but the ones that are in abundance are ones that are clearly needed for life. Okay, so this is a fun chart. Okay, so talking about catalysis, catalytic reaction. So a catalyst is a compound that supports a reaction without being consumed in the reaction. Okay. So sometimes, fairly rarely, I guess, you can find a chain of reactions that each produce a catalyst at the end that supports another reaction, that then produces the same catalyst that started the whole thing. Okay, so as long as you've got resources to support it, that puppy will go like just like a hamster on a wheel, we can say. Okay, so there's one that's like an 8-step reaction, autocatalytic cycle. That's in all of our cells, and it's intrinsic to being able to use energy in the cell. Okay, so let's say we eat sugar, that has to be broken down and then made available to cells to use in the metabolic process, right? Okay, so this does it, broadly speaking, right? This is a key element of doing it. An 8-step autocatalytic cycle that's in every cell that basically is supporting the development of something called ATP, which you need to make about your body weight in ATP every day to keep going. And it just happens to be supported by an autocatalytic cycle of 8 organic compounds, which are in every cell of your body. Okay. So I'm suggesting that the fact of this chemical coincidence, that these reactions are there to support life, I would say it needs to be explained. I mean, what a coincidence, right? And I'm just suggesting by the picture, you can see the complexity of the reaction. And this goes all the way back to the start of life. Okay. But as they say on late night television, I'm not done yet. Okay. So you can also run it backwards. Really? Yes. So as an anabolic reaction instead of a catabolic one. And if you run it backwards in the absence of oxygen, it creates precursor chemicals for a number of great functions in your body, to include, fatty acids, sterol citrate, but the purines and the steps toward amino acids and DNA. Okay? So it just happens to make precursor chemicals, intermediates, for biochemicals that are going to be very important to each of our development. And your body can switch, whether it wants to run the cycle, what I call forward or backward, depending on what it needs. It's very sophisticated. Okay, so then in addition, just in general, in addition to that one autocatalytic cycle that I mentioned, also wanted to just point out the fact that we're talking here about, okay, lipids, they're fats. Maybe we don't want as many of those, but we got them. Proteins, polysaccharides, RNA and DNA, nucleotides, we kind of like them. Proteins and bases, which then support the DNA and RNA. So there are very few pathways, chemical pathways, that are needed to supply tremendously complex biochemicals that we use to run our life, that our bodies use to run it. Okay? And oh, by the way, these are made basically at the beginning out of water and carbon dioxide, so that we could say that we're kind of made out of air at a gross oversimplification. So you take air and then you can get a lot of keen things out of it that help support. So I'm suggesting that this is supportive of the argument that, as Freeman Dyson put it, the world was waiting for us, or that there's a predisposition or a predilection towards life as we know it in the chemical and biological range. That's my contention. So I'm trying to say that there's evidence to support my previous conclusion that humans are important and that complexification is a central tendency, subtendency, in a world that's winding down. Fred Hoyle talked about when he discovered the resonance of carbon in the sun. He said, this seems to be that some super intellect was monkeying with the laws of physics. And I'm suggesting that the same super intellect seems to have been monkeying, putting a cosmic thumb, if you will, on the scale of chemistry and biology as well. And I'm not saying that's decisive, I'm saying that's circumstantial, but I'm saying it's evidence. Right. Okay. So in addition, there's other fine-tunings that support human life. We've talked about the elements are particularly fit for life, the water and CO2. Water serves as the matrix of the cell. It has special properties. We could talk about them. CO2 is very interesting in that you can, if you've got a plant, right, and the plant's in the soil and it's growing, what's supplying the material for the mass of the plant? It's the carbon and the carbon dioxide, right? Okay. That carbon dioxide, right? And then its waste product is oxygen. How convenient. How convenient. That's neat. Okay. And so if we consider carbon dioxide a little further, so in your cells, you're metabolizing and you're releasing carbon dioxide. That's dissolvable in liquid in your blood. So then it takes it back to your lungs, which then it becomes air again and is expelled. You know, pretty cool. Okay. And then higher, so-called higher life forms, as I'm calling them higher, I guess, are oxygen-driven metabolisms. So that to support brains, and evidence of higher, what I'm calling higher life, that requires 20% of your energy for 2% of your body mass, okay? So it wouldn't be evolutionarily favored. It's favored now that we're a so-called apex predator, having a brain, right, that can do math, let's say. But on the way there, it wouldn't necessarily be justifiable at the margin, as engineers might talk about it, for each. So oxygen used to be a poison, right? It was locked up in compounds around the world. And only with the plant life and the photosynthesis, there became free oxygen, which started out as a poison. And then animals learned to cope with it, and now animals need it, right? And this drives the faster metabolism that then supports the ability to have bigger brains, which then supports the idea of being able to have a higher energy density flow rate that we documented last week. So I'm suggesting that this is further evidence that not only life, but human life with brains seems to be supported in the overall laws of physics and chemistry and biology. Okay, some inferences. In the prior charts, I've tried to show that the Earth is a very special place. Supports life development. Chemistry actively supports the creation of life. Physiological fine-tuning, that was on the last chart, supports the development of human life and brains. And the evidence is compatible with a creator who intended human-like beings. Nevertheless, life developed in a stochastic way, no straight path. In other words, there were a number of bottlenecks in development, and that if you have something that requires a 1 in a million chance of it happening, but you provide, let's say, 7 million opportunities for it to happen, it's pretty sure it's going to happen at some point. So to me, that's what I'm trying to convey, suggest about stochastic development. Nevertheless, this reinforces the idea of an arm's length creator, so that non-believers have the freedom to claim extreme coincidences as the cause or try to ignore, deny, explain away any evidence. It's up to them. The importance of chance and opportunity also shows the importance of human choice as we become creators, right? We're handling this energy, and we're now becoming more capable and influencing the direction of development itself in the world. So that we have the freedom to fail as we make choices. Doesn't mean we're going to always pick the right one, but with our massive brains, we can try to make the best decisions. Okay, so the creator, anybody recognize the picture? Queen Victoria, thank you, yes. Okay, so I'm trying to use her as an example of the sovereign can choose to be bound, right? The sovereign can choose to be bound. So that what's an example of this? Even Victoria might have said that, that the agree to be bound in that she would agree to deliver mail, let's say, from India to the United Kingdom, but in the expectation of reciprocity that India would deliver mail from British citizens. So sovereigns can agree to be bound, usually on the basis of reciprocity with others, okay? So in Genesis, God created humans to live, let me back up. So I've mentioned the fact that I believe it's an arm's length relationship. And so we say, why didn't God do it directly? And I'm saying that in our book, in Genesis, it said he did do it directly the first time. and that created a garden paradise where he interacted with humans and walked with them in the cool of the day, right? But he gave us the freedom to fail, and we blew it, right? Got tossed out of the garden, and now we're east of Eden. So Judeo-Christian tradition has a plausible explanation for why this time around we seem to be not directly in the scope of what's being done on creation. Okay. We also notice that in Genesis, at first, God told Adam and Eve that there was one tree they couldn't eat, and they said this was the knowledge of good and evil. But then later, after they ate of it, he said there's another tree they shouldn't eat from, and that's the tree of life. And he said the reason you shouldn't eat from that is that you will always stay that way once you eat of the tree of life, right? Then he kicks us out, so we wouldn't go ahead and eat of the tree of life anyway, right? Okay, but to me, my interpretation of that would be that God, in our narrative, in Genesis, doesn't intend for humans always to be outside the garden or whatever, or to be in the fallen state, but instead has a hope or expectation that he can bring them back, if you will, into righteousness and draw them to himself. That's my little interpretation, but I'm going to say more about it. Okay, so I mentioned before, I follow Anselm on something where we say, what is God? God is greater than you can imagine. Okay, so to me, having a God create somebody that has liberty to rebel, is greater than a God who would create a being to just salute smartly and say, yes, sir, how high? Okay. However, as I mentioned, we took advantage of that opportunity and rebelled and sinned. Okay. So that if God is God and one of his main creations, we think, is rebellious and sinful, logically that's a disconnect. How can God be God logically, and have a primary creature that's sinful and rebellious? Now, we could say that God said, like, hey, I make the rules, okay, could be. However, in looking at the creation, we can see that God really loves math. So we talk about the, inexplicable power of math to explain physics by, I think it was Victor, somebody, but anyway. But Galileo, I think, said that numbers are the language of God, the language of creation. Okay, and so what is math? Math's a system of logic. Okay, you have axioms. You can you can prove things through math. Okay, so I used to laugh and say the Creator may be able to hit a baseball 500 feet, could be a really good dancer, but really likes math. And so what kind of math we talking here? We're talking matrix multiplication, non-abelian symmetry, eigenvectors, serious math, right? Einstein supposedly had to go for help on his general relativity on the math dealing with tensors. Okay, so my contention, again, this slide, I'm leaving a lot of the evidence, right, and go into a little bit of speculation, trying to explain why, or try to create an idea why the arm's length creation. okay? And I'm saying that God could choose to be bound to logic, through the logic, and that he would then, if he created something that presumably he foreknew would fall, that in theory he would have to have a salvation plan, right? Salvation plan to how to fix it. And so, long story short, I'm suggesting that's Earth's place, right? In helping God to fulfill his salvation plan and bring the creation back to himself. Okay, so the New Testament says that God is looking to create saints by transforming humans through the renewal of their minds. And the offer on the table is for humans that they become adopted into God's family. Adopted into God's family. What does that mean? I don't really know, but I think it's a good thing. I think if you were adopted into God's family, you wouldn't regret it, even though costs might be high. Okay? But he's looking for saints. He's not necessarily looking for what I call 51%ers. They're, they remember to call their mom on Mother's Day. That's good. That's good. We're for that. But he's looking for saints, right? And that God can show the heavenly host that they can give freedom and still overcome rebellion and draw their creatures to themselves. So that's my suggestion of why I'm saying he went through what my Jewish friends might call the simus of creating this whole universe and humans at arm's length. Okay? Because he wants to be able to, okay. So, wanted to talk about, just mention this vignette. And this could be famous. Bruce would know it if it's famous, certainly. But the idea, I remember this old video where they had 3 ballerinas and a dancer going across the stage. And the ballerinas were, fluttering, and the dancer was strutting. And the director stopped them and said to the ballerinas, "What are you thinking?" And they said, "How do I look? Do I look good?" He said, No. You should be thinking, "I love him best." And all the ballerinas should be saying, "I love him best." And they're like, "Right." And they go back and they try it again, and they're more enthusiastic. And so there's one ballerina on each of his sides, and then the ballerina that's out displaces one and then displaces the other, and it's like, "Oh, I love him best, I love him best." Okay? So then the director looks at them, stops them again, says, "That's great." He says, "But who really loves him best?" And these 2 ballerinas just kind of like pull back and push the third one forward. And he said, "She does." Right? And I'm thinking that's a little bit like if we were souls in heaven and we were exposed directly to the glory of God. It's very easy to be able to say then, "Oh, I love him best. No, I love him best. I love him best." Okay? But then when you're on a cold, rocky planet, with flesh and blood consequences, and you can't see directly that light, do you still love him best? So I'm suggesting that that's a possible way to look at the creation. And I call it Welcome to Life School, okay, whereby God creates a place kind of at arm's length or away from his direct presence as a way of teaching and testing. Almost no one leaves unchanged. Humans see how they do when mostly left to their own devices. certainly teaches humility and encourages dependence on God, among much else. And in a world of fierce Darwinian competition, Christianity, instead of going with the flow, encourages altruism. It's a religion of sacrifice rather than a philosophy of utility maximization, okay? So that a normal training thing would be you go to let's say a Darwinian world, and you learn to cut and thrust and, guard what's yours and try to get more. However, I would say that God's purpose here appears to be that he's teaching humility, forgiveness, some level of altruism, okay, as part of an education process. And in a show me world, it teaches us to live by faith, belief in faith in things not seen. And I also see the earth as a semi-synthetic training environment constructed for a divine purpose. Okay? What do I mean by semi-synthetic? It's real, it's real. But if it's constructed for a purpose, right? So that makes it semi-synthetic, not completely natural, not completely resulting from chance. So I'm saying that Earth was created, humans are a goal, implementing a salvation plan appears to be logically needed. And again, I once asked an attorney in a setting such as this, said, can God sign a contract? Can you sue God? And he looked at me and said, I think you'd have trouble getting a venue, which I thought was funny, okay, which we certainly would, right? So difference between a covenant and a contract, can you enforce it? Let's see. Okay, so anyway, I'm going to try, I think I've got a couple slides to kind of like summarize a bit or something, but I have, I think, put a lot of stuff out on the table, and what would you all like to question or comment about that?
How would it work if we abandoned the first 11 chapters of Genesis? Stop the notion that we were created perfectly and fell with grace, that we just evolved like the dinosaurs and polar bears, crocodiles, and eat each other, and God came along to Abraham and said, there's a better way.
Okay, so I'm not sure if I completely grasp your question.
The scientific evidence for the biblical flood is pretty small, like super. All right, and so that's part of the first 11 chapters of Genesis. What if we just started with Abraham?
Okay, so I'll take issue with, I'm not going to defend every chapter, but the idea that humans were created good, or the world was created good and fell, is, I think, an excellent concept, because normally then otherwise you would get into the fact of the Manichaeism, that the body is bad and the spirit is good and it's all good and all that. But saying that we were created good and fell kind of like balances those, right? And further, if you say that we just evolved and there was nothing special about it, then you get into, then humans should be managed like a herd or something, that there's no real human dignity.
That's when God came to Abraham, when God intervened in human history.
Okay.
Not when he created these perfect people and kicked them out of the garden because they ate apples.
Okay.
And wiped them all out with the flood, for which there's no scientific evidence.
Well, but the idea that he then regretted creating humans and wiped them out, except for a couple,
The notion that God has regret then is thrown out of all this, and it's all positive. God says, come on, we can be better folks. So I'm going to send Abraham to try.
Okay, that's an interesting point. Thank you.
And I have a second comment.
Uh-oh.
I think you can make a better case for the science that life is a unique feature than you can, that there's no other place in the universe that life could be.
Right, and I think I've noted that a couple times, that life could be other places. We just don't know. We haven't been able to contact them yet. What other points, questions, comments? Bruce.
The idea of an arm's length relationship between God and his creatures, us. I understand you to mean only that he created us with a choice, that we may make choices. That's what the arm's lengthness means. It does not mean that we cannot establish through prayer some sort of relationship with our Creator.
Yeah.
The concept of arm's lengthness could be seen as kind of getting in the way of any relationship by prayer or otherwise.
Right, and we talked about that, I think, last time too. But when I'm talking about an arm's length relationship, I'm comparing and contrasting with walking in the garden with God in the cool of the day. I'm talking about the need for belief in things not seen, as opposed to God can be in my heart, I can be inhabited by the Holy Spirit, and I can have we believe through prayer, we can have a direct relationship with God, not even intermediated by priests. Howard. There's a number of, okay, the question was referring back to the chart on the citric acid cycle and talking about autocatalytic cycle, and there are a lot of those. I wouldn't say there's a lot of them, there's a number of them. But it's, I think it's fairly rare. Okay, let me forge ahead, but if we'll get more chance for discussion in a minute. So the argument summary is that the first week we made the argument that the universe has a purposive creator who transcends time, space, and matter. Last week we presented evidence that although the universe as a whole is winding down, there's an important critical tendency to build up complexity. And for a purposive creator, this increased structure is presumably key to their purpose. On this line, humans are seen as important in an otherwise vast cosmos. This week, evidence was presented that there was a cosmic thumb on the scale, as I think of it, that enabled humans to develop and assume earthly prominence. In my speculation that the Creator made Earth and life as a way to educate souls in human form and draw us back to them, the Creator, voluntarily. And that was it.
Well, I noticed that you said to bring us back to them, which I guess supports the, I think in the first chapter of the Masoretic text, so I'm told, because I can't read it, in Genesis said Adonai, it said Elohim, which is plural in Hebrew. And then we have in the second chapter sort of, I guess, this conversation between God the Father and Yeshua that would go on and be like us, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that was after.
So that sounds like a little plurality in a triune God.
Right. Now, okay, so the question or comment was the fact that I was referring to the Creator in the plural, and I've got to just say that I'm doing that because now folks are using the plural pronouns more, and rather than a he or a she or an it. However, your point is well taken, that if we consider we have a triune God, right? So plural works, right, for the triune God. And then, yeah, I recall that it was after in the case of the Tower of Babel, that God said, they want to be just like us, which, referred to him.
Later, about the 11th chapter.
Right. So I think referring to the Creator in the plural is okay.
I believe so.
Very good.
Not multiple gods, a God in the three parts.
In the three parts.
Ruach Kodesh, Yeshua, and Elohim.
God with us, right? God with us. Guys, okay. So I know you're out there. I can hear you breathing. Let me just say, okay, so that for what it's worth, if you're interested in some of the topics I've raised, I've identified some additional reading that you can take on at your leisure if you wish. And I have reason to believe these charts are going to be posted at some place that we'll be able to get to them. I really recommend Return of the God Hypothesis by Stephen Meyer. That's just new, and he goes through a lot of the science, at an accessible level of detail. So, but a number of the ones there. Luke Barnes, terrific. He has like a 12-part answer to the question of if the cosmos is so big, why do we think humans are important? So real good stuff. Michael Denton has a series of books where he talks about the examples of fine-tuning that support human life, which are wonderful. And the stochastic universe, we get to Christian de Duve on that in his book Singularities, where he talks about the bottlenecks in development and how they were overcome. And then I've talked before, I mentioned at Wrestlers, if you click on this, Paul Arvison was kind enough to post a number of my lectures on the internet, and then God and Nature magazines published a couple of my articles, including one on the multiverse and one on materialism. Again, I think we've got a couple more minutes. Bruce.
Your presentation of the requirements of being so special in the earth that I assume that you think our search for life, not even intelligent life, but life outside of this planet is a futility that we are discovering. I thought hundreds, thousands, I don't know how many zeros get added
Thousands.
to the exoplanets that we can now imagine and begin to see. You would say, because of the special requirements that you outlined, that there is unlikely to be any of those which would have the requirements necessary for life.
No. Okay. So that I'm talking about the fact that all these requirements are stiff, and I think they're an explanation. Okay, excuse me, to back up. So Bruce was mentioning the fact that in this slide, I was talking about how unlikely it was to find life, and he was saying that indicated that I didn't believe there was more life out there. I don't know. The universe is so big. I would be shocked if there wasn't life someplace else, but that doesn't mean that it's within enough light years to come visit us, or that it's going to be somebody broadcasting game shows from Alpha Centauri that we pick up, and find out. But it is so big that even if there were life out there, it's not clear that we would encounter them, but it's possible. And again, if we talk about a stochastic, chance-driven universe, then there's so many different ways that can fail or not come about, I should say, that it lowers the odds. So that I would say that all these exoplanets that they're finding, like 2/3 of them are so-called gas giants. They're not going to have life as we know it. And then further, that the Earth had what was called the boring billion, where we had one-celled organism, but we didn't have the multi-celled organism, and that was another natural stopping place for life. So it could be life, but not intelligent life, right? So so I would expect that there's life out there. Will we be able to communicate with it? Not clear.
But that's a very different question as to whether we can communicate it with it if it happens to exist. I thought that your whole thrust was that God had a purpose, and that we, humans, were that purpose among only one of his purposes? Are there other purposes out there? It's not a matter of communication.
Okay.
It is a matter of whether we are God's purpose.
Oh, okay. So again, to repeat, Bruce, for the viewers, the idea was I was suggesting that humans were God's purpose, and that if there's no other life out there, how does that impact us? And as I was telling the gentleman last week, if we don't work out, I think God has other plans. You know, and I think that's one reason why we're important and our decisions are important. Our pain is important because it's not clear that there's a royal road that we're just going to be christened and come back. It's education and development, I would say, on a spiritual level that God is looking for, but that the universe is so big, there's other chances in the universe, and then maybe there's another universe, you know, there could be a lot of things. If you're the master of time and space, you have more resources that you can do things with than most of us contemplate.
You know, all this thing about outer space and all these universes and galaxies and so on and so forth. And here we are on this planet, and we haven't really, truly learned overall how to live and respect each other.
Right.
And so what are we going to do out there?
Well, yeah. So the comment was that we're not doing so well on Earth. What are we going to do in space? And I think, yes, and I think that's part of the education process, is that we would then learn to live together. If we consider Jesus going back and he's saying, you know, they used to say an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. He says, but I tell you to love one another. Okay. Now, Jesus was speaking from the Middle East, okay? And so even today in the Middle East, you know, that philosophy is not going to get you real far. And they say, be kind to your enemies. Do something. That's completely counterintuitive, right? And so how do we take that on board? How do we process that? How do we try to emulate that? I think is part of the education. Sir.
So you think God is an arm's length away, but do you think he might also be actively influencing things that happen, and you know, the knowledge of dark matter and dark energy that nobody knows anything about, and some of that be to one force or another pulling us some way or receding in one transpire?
So the gentleman was talking about the fact of the arm's length creation, and does the creator involve himself in our affairs somehow? I think would be fair. Okay, so again, I probably didn't explain what I meant by arm's length adequately. However, yes, the answer is yes. And if God created this for a purpose, I would think that he's trying to influence us to bring up certain situations, right, that will stress us and will educate us, in my opinion. And then indeed, we know from our book that God has chosen certain empires to rise and Israel to be punished and things like that, so that we have it in our Bible that God involves himself. We also have prayer. We believe in prayer, direct communication, the efficacy of prayer, right? So, yeah, I believe that God has a purpose and he intervenes. That being said, then you say, well, how can he allow suffering, right? I would think, right? Because then it's like, and then I get back to, again, he's trying to make saints and people who have faith in God, right? As opposed to, I like to say that if we were pets, God would treat us much better. Okay? If he just thought of us as a source of amusement, you know, I think one of the first things he'd do is get rid of cancer or death. So then that leads me to believe then there must be a deeper purpose, and try to make some purpose for the suffering that's there too. My opinion. Let's see. Okay, well, I believe it's about the time, so thank you for your attention and the good discussion, and I'll remind you of a needle point that was over my thesis advisor's desk, saying, I know I haven't answered your questions, but now I hope you are confused at a new higher level about more important things. So with that, thank you all very much, and see you next time.